Well, hi again, and welcome once more to Templates for Change Sensory Arts and Sciences presentation on exploring the world's special places, part 2, to do with the human story. And here we are back at Hampton Court as an example, looking at working on how we can read our senses and translate what they're telling us. Hi, I'm John. I'm continuing with this series of presentations for you, and I'm delighted to be doing this about Hampton Court because it's one of my most favourite places. I've seen lots of places in the world, and Hampton Court is fascinating, excellent for doing this kind of human story work because so much went on there. And indeed, when you go to Hampton Court, you'll see visitors from all over the world because they have a sense that it's an important place to visit too. So remember, we have our automatic senses should be helping us. We program them with our toolkit work. And now we're getting on looking at our more advanced senses, helping us read and replay earlier times to discover the hidden human story. So now we're going to look at what our senses are telling us and how to read them. Okay, well, let's get started. Now, before we actually get to Hampton Court, one of the important things to do is to prime our pumps with instructions on what we want our senses to do and what our overall approach is going to be. So as we go through this presentation, these are the kind of things that you can be telling yourself to be prepared to do before you get there. So you might say, as they say, you hit the ground running, or you hit the ground walking or ambling in this case perhaps, but certainly with all your senses well primed. Now we're going to start with our 5 senses because they really are quite remarkable and do a lot more than we might often think they do. Often we use our sight, mostly we use our sight in fact, but they're 2 little postage stamps, aren't they, in our face. So here we're going to start with the other amazing 4, which can tell us so many things we might well miss, and then come back to look at our sight, which indeed, of course, is quite remarkable. So, hearing and sound. Now here's the thing, isn't it? What happens to people in the different places and parts of Hampton Court? Are people quiet or noisy? And particularly look at children, because children are often very responsive to the place. Not always, but quite often. And you can think, are sounds deadened or are they accentuated? Do you want to go quiet? Do you feel that you don't want to talk? Or do you feel very chatty and talkative? And then you can think, well, what were the sounds of the past here? Do I hear music or laughter, shouting, whispers, talking, hubbub? What are the kind of things that you think might have been going on there? And then when we get into touch and to movement, now are people moving around slowly or quickly or changing speed? Or do they stop at various places and look and stand? What happens when they go from one room to another? Watch people when they come into the Great Hall in Hampton Court, if you're going there, and see what they do, or any other large hall or church. Do they walk in the door and suddenly stop and look around with a kind of awe, or take no notice? You see, and that can tell you so much. Again, how do you wish to move? Try slow motion. Try walking very, very slowly, or try walking quickly. What feels best? What feels appropriate for the place you're in? And here we have a picture of visitors enjoying themselves at Hampton Court, wearing velvet cloaks to connect better to the past. What a clever thing to do. How do the elders and how do the children behave? Now we're going on to 2 senses that we might not expect to use in a circumstance like this, but actually can be Very, very important. See, today when we think of smell, everything's really rather sanitized, isn't it? And if a smell occurs, we get out some air vapor thing and disguise it. But what were the smells of yesterday? Because the smells of yesterday would have been much stronger and more powerful, I suspect. The kitchens, the privy, I mean, where were they? I mean, they didn't have flashing loos like we have today. And actually, did anyone wash? What about that? Have a think about that. Then what about horses? There were horses everywhere, weren't there? Manure from the horses. They had rushes on the floor that got swept. They didn't have vacuum cleaners. I mean, there's a real fiesta of smell. And when you're actually thinking about the past, it's very important smell, because actually when you go to somewhere like Hampton Court, there are very few smells that there would have been in the past. So try and imagine yourself back into that time. What would all the different smells have been like? This could really be a fiesta, in fact. Now, taste, well, you're glad to know, no, we're not going to lick things. In fact, that's definitely what we're not going to do. But what did people eat and drink? What tastes were prevalent in those times and why? You know, we've got salt, sweet, bitter, savory, etc. You know, what do you taste? Because strangely enough, taste is a remarkably kind of electrical system, and as is smell. And so you can actually start to taste things on your tongue that come from more, almost you might say, the atmospheres of the place rather than the physical things that are there today. So that's an important part to think about as well. Now let's move on to sight, because it is of course so powerful and important. But here we're suggesting, of course, use your other four senses first and then use sight to extend them, to add to them. Now I've got a picture here of a passageway which not so many visitors seem to look at today, but in fact this would have been an extremely busy place with servants picking up meals for the hall. It would have probably been, next to the kitchen, one of the noisiest, busiest places in Hampton Court. Now, one of the valuable things that you can do using sight is to find nooks and crannies and unexpected sites and places to explore, unusual things. And so tell your eyes, find me things that are unusual or different, and then you can use your other senses to try and unravel it. Well, now we're going to look at our feelings and emotions that we described in the previous presentation as being very important. And here's a thought before we start, because today we're bombarded with emotions, aren't we, from televisions and hoardings and magazines and newspapers, etc. And you can wonder, can't you, whether in fact our own emotions get dulled down, you might say, by overkill from these external emotions. But in Tudor times, it wasn't like that. Their emotions weren't used up by watching television. And you might think to yourself, when the Tudor folk did feel something, could it not have been much, much stronger than ours, much, much more powerful? It's very interesting to read poetry from the Tudor times, because it is very, very intense and quite fascinating as an example of what life might have been. So think of it in those terms, perhaps. Now here, for example, is a little window looking out over to the gardens. And it was a view from Wolsey's private rooms into the garden, where it is said he walked in the evenings, contemplating his eventual fate. And of course, at that time in Wolsey's life, as he was falling from grace, it was a very difficult and tough and emotional time. And here's a place to stand and sense and feel and wonder what you can connect to. So do you pick up a negative emotions and fears in particular places? And do you pick up joy and happiness in others, for example? And let's look at the other side of it, fun and laughter. Well, we all enjoy ourselves, and folks of the past were surely no different. And here's a picture of a lady from Hampton Court, and what might she and others have been getting up to there? Enjoying themselves, or just off to an assignation? So these are other kinds of emotions that we might pick up. Where might there have been music and dancing, for example? Now, of course, looking at Love and Passion, many of the events at Hampton Court surrounded Henry VIII and his passions. And where might we sense these assignations, and of course assignations of less important people who also lived there? I wonder what features you will pick up. And now we get into the subtle atmospheres, the subtle energies of the place that can give us all sorts of fascinating feelings and experiences of what happened and the people who lived there. Big subject which we can only cover very briefly here. But often we can tell the difference between one place and another, can't we? Between moving from the Great Hall into this great watching chamber next door. What do we feel? Is it a tingling on our hands, on our face, or more general sensations of the strength and nature of the energies there? Sometimes people say we felt very fizzy. It felt strong. The energies felt strong. So what do we feel there? And then we can make comparisons between very, very different places. For example, below the Great Watching Chamber in Hampton Court is a cellar, which is very atmospheric, but in a most different way. Different people would have been there and worked there. Make notes what we feel as you move carefully from a large chamber to passageways to small rooms. And it's good, incidentally, to have a little notebook with you to write things down as you register and feel things. And if you're with friends, then you can compare them. Well, right, so that's all about our senses at Hampton Court, and hope you've enjoyed that. We have one more to go in this series, and I'll be looking forward to talking to you about that shortly. And if you want more about Templates for Change, look at templatesforchange.org. Okay, all the best. Look forward to talking again soon.